Well, good morning, if it's morning indeed where you are. We're going to be doing a video for preliminary legal studies today, and it's about all this new technology that is being released or being talked about in order to help limit the spread of coronavirus and ease restrictions sooner. So this is questioning the privacy questions of it. It's by Nadia Daly, but at what cost? And this is an example of a drone that is currently in development with a company in Australia and a company in the US working together, the drone company and the technology company. It's claiming to know when someone's coughing. It's claiming from I think it's 8 meters away. It can see how fast your heart is beating, your temperature. It's able to do things like work out if you're breaking the meter and a half rule of social distancing. And for a lot of people, that sounds, like amazing technology, but it certainly asks the question of our privacy and of the government overstepping their ability to surveil us, their surveillance of the public. So this is certainly a question of law reform and technology in the individual when it comes to law and action. So let's have a look. So if you don't feel comfortable signing up to the government's COVID safe tracking app, then you probably won't be happy to hear about the pandemic drone. Software being developed at the University of South Australia in conjunction with Canadian drone manufacturer Dragonfly could see drones used to monitor the health of people, including spotting sneezes and tracking whether they have a fever. It is just one way technology could be used to track and slow the spread of a virus like COVID-19. But experts warn that new surveillance technologies must include privacy safeguards before they are adopted. So let's straight away, when this happens, we jump to our syllabus and have a see what we can see. All right, legal, there's the syllabus. Let's jump down, having a look, getting past all this stuff, getting into the nitty gritty of the preliminary course, and we're looking at this part here. So once we've finished through the legal system, the individual and the law. So it's asking questions about, for example, the balancing of rights with the needs of the state. So if this information can help the state battle the coronavirus, if it can help people get out quicker, then it's this question of, well, what is more important, the rights of the individual here or the needs of the state? And it's certainly a question that you're asking yourself when you're assessing the effectiveness of things. So, for example, dispute resolution, achieving justice for and between individuals. That's an example of this type of question, but it's the question of between the state and individuals. So let's continue on. The heart rate can be detected within 8 meters. There's Javan Charles, probably murdered that as well. My apologies, Javan. Professor Javan Charles, who holds positions with the University of South Australia and the Department of Defence, is developing software for the pandemic drone. There you go. The Department of Defence is involved as well. Excellent. The device uses thermal cameras and artificial intelligence to measure some of the indicators of coronavirus in groups of people: heart rate, body temperature, coughing, and sneezing. Heart rate can be measured in 2 different ways, he told 730. From a drone, we normally would measure it as a subtle change in skin tone that's associated with each heartbeat, and it's caused by changing the volume of blood in the skin. It also causes slight movement. The drone would also be able to detect a cough from 15 to 20 meters away, while heart rate can be detected within 6 to 8 meters with only a very small margin of error. It could also be used to monitor social distancing. Now, if you're a cynical person, you're going to look at all of these capabilities when it comes to fighting diseases and go, how are they different to the capabilities of, say, a state seeking out a fugitive in many of the movies that we see, Minority Report and various other things? There's no difference, really. While still 6 months from completion, Professor Charles hoped it would be used to collect data on a large scale and track patterns of behaviour to paint a broad picture of the spread of COVID-19 in a city rather than monitor individuals. When you look at thousands of people or millions of people, you'll start to see a trend, he said. And I think we don't have systems in place to surveil for that particularly. It would be very useful to know how many people are suffering from symptoms associated with respiratory distress. So if you see a lot of people coughing and sneezing and with elevated heart rates and breathing rates and fever, okay, that's good to know. And if that's increasing, that's very important to know. Okay, so this is certainly an argument that can be made for the needs of the state. It's a question of, well, we really need to think about this idea of when we're talking about the needs of the state here, how much should an individual give up so that all the people around them are safe, especially in a pandemic? It's an easier question to ask when there is a pandemic raging throughout the globe. It's certainly an important question to ask once the pandemic starts to slow and diminish. Will the state give up this new power and this new technology? If not, how will they regulate that new technology? That's certainly a question. It's a relationship between the rights of the state and the rights and the responsibilities of the state, and our rights as citizens and our responsibility as citizens to look out for each other. So certainly this question, and one of the things I remember reading a long time ago was that Google was actually better at predicting where illnesses were breaking out than the government was, because they were able to use an algorithm and see what people were actually Googling when it came to their symptoms. So private companies have been able to do this kind of data collection for a while now, but that's people willingly putting their information that they have these symptoms into a database that's owned by Google. Whereas this is someone walking outside and a drone flying nearby and measuring every person that walks past's temperature and whether they cough or they sneeze and how often they do. I mean, it sounds relatively frightening. Speaking of frightening, here's Toby Walsh, an expert in artificial intelligence. He has concerns about new technology and how it could be used. Professor Child does acknowledge that technology could also be used to watch and target individuals if a future user wanted to. All such technologies carry a risk with them, he said. I might think it's a very bad idea to use drones to chase people around who might be sick, but others might have different ideas. And it's very hard to restrain them from using it like that once the genie is out of the bottle. This question of the role of the law in regulating technology. Who keeps the state in check? What are the legal methods? Are they going to have internal reviews of the government of working out who's using this technology? Are we going to have ombudsmen making sure that they aren't breaking human rights by, using it to find out more information about someone than they're legally allowed to? Is the Human Rights Commission going to get involved, etc., etc.? Are people going to start using technology and using them for their own ends? Are we going to have corruption issues here? So individual and technology, you haven't even reached the technology part. This is resolving disputes. When it comes to technology, what are the impacts of technology for the individual? This is clearly right up there. Legal implications, difficulties with enforcing rights, future directions, the role of law reform. This is all in this right here. So the misuse of interactive technologies, privacy issues, security and surveillance, all here. Let's continue. Police in the US city of Westport, an hour north of New York, so it's relatively near Canada, that's probably why they were doing it, were trialing the software with, remember, the Canadian company Dragonfly, but pulled out last week over privacy concerns. There you go. There's a lot of discussion going on at the moment about how we manage that privacy so that you don't take away from people's freedom or start imposing on them unnecessarily, Professor Charles said. But you do want to watch for the presence of this infectious disease. So there's a lot of challenges. He's right. This could have amazing benefits. Also, terrifying downsides. Artificial intelligence expert, Professor Toby Walsh, that's him, urged a cautious approach towards adopting technologies like the pandemic drone. Probably should have been cautious in that choice of shirt as well. That's very loud. I think the devil's in the detail, how it's rolled out, what safeguards are put in place, he said. There's every reason that this technology could be a useful tool in our armory with rolling back the restrictions and allowing people to go about somewhat more normal lives. But equally, there are concerns that you'd have about people's privacy and about whether when normality has returned that we are not finding ourselves in a big brother surveillance state. So that's that idea that big brother is always watching you. All right, 1984, the concept that the government is always there, always looking. This is a short bit about surveillance tech already being used overseas. So in Hong Kong, for example, they make you put this banned on when you come into the country and you've got to self-quarantine for 2 weeks and they call you. Very strict. So it's just talking about all of that and how that would not particularly happen, people would not be happy with that if it happened in Australia. Fever scanning, another, for me, terrifying concept. Australian entrepreneur Rustam Kanga hopes that temperature taking technology will soon be more widespread here. His company, Omniscient, in other words, all-knowing, well, that's just not a terrifying concept, is it? Has developed an automated fever scanning system which can operate through CCTV cameras to check the temperatures of people in crowds. He claimed it was accurate to about 0.2 of a degree Celsius. Now and in the future, we will be releasing the lockdown. There'll be lesser restrictions, he told 730. And in those environments, we are going to still have to keep track of everyone. We're going to have to monitor people to make sure there is no one round with a fever, because the fever is the first external indication, usually, of an infection of the coronavirus. Dr. Kanga said the software used artificial intelligence, including facial recognition, to automatically read the body temperature of hundreds of people at once in a crowd and alert authorities if someone had a fever. Note that you go outside, your temperature's a little higher than normal, the authorities will be called. The system could then track them through a network of cameras until they could be identified by a staff member or official. It uses what's called a thermographic camera, which is a camera that can detect the heat of things in the environment, he said. In this case, it's detecting the temperature of a person's skin. Dr. Kanga believed the technology could be useful in places where people are still gathering in groups such as schools, pharmacies, shops, defence facilities, hospitals, and prisons. Today, there is no real checking in public areas where people have fevers, he said. A system like this will give them an early indication that there's someone who potentially has a fever. Can you imagine getting a call from your school because your school has CCTV cameras and they've noted that your son or daughter's skin is 3 degrees too high and that you detect they have a fever and I need to come and collect them. And we've tracked them from the gym through to the multi-purpose hall and down into the cafe area, and they're sitting there with their friends and I need to come pick them up. Not horrifying in the slightest. We won't be able to go back to our normal lives. The use of facial recognition technology is highly controversial, and concerns have long been raised by civil liberties groups about its use in public spaces and about the potential for authorities to use it to track citizens. But Dr. Kanga said his software anonymized faces, anonymous, by default, and people would only be identified when requested by the user. Okay, so the user of the system just has to click a button and can de-anonymize them. Fantastic. Everyone's face can be redacted so that nobody sees anything, he said. However, if there's a person with a fever, that person's image is sent to the smartphone or the paramedic so that they can be checked out. Professor Walsh said technologies like this could be part of Australia's approach, but won't replace the need for social distancing. It's worth pointing out these modern technologies are not going to be a panacea, he said. They're not going to allow us to go back to our normal lives. We are still going to have social distance. We are still going to have to keep ourselves isolated physically as much as possible from each other until we have a vaccine. And until that point, our lives are going to be somewhat on hold. Okay, so a very interesting article. Note that most of these technologies are still in development, but they are a really good case study for the individual and the law. Asking these questions about what role should the law play in regulating technology? What kind of safeguards should we have for a technology where CCTV cameras are going through public places and finding the temperature of people and then sending photos of your face to the user? How do we ensure that that stays as a public health measure and not a law enforcement terrifying scenario? Okay, so many questions to ask from this type of article. Go and check it out on ABC. Make sure you save that. Be fantastic to refer back to for anyone looking at legal studies and the individual and the law.